Chair. Thanks very much for having me here today. So as Beth said, I'm here to give a kind of top-line perspective about how Fawcett considers the government's cuts are going to impact disproportionately on women. But just to tell you a little bit about Fawcett before I start, for those of you who don't know, the Fawcett Society is the UK's leading campaign for equality between women and men. We trace our roots back to 1866 when Millicent Fawcett, our namesake, ran the peaceful struggle for the right to vote for women. And our vision is of a society where women and our rights and freedoms are equally valued and respected, and where we have equal power and influence in shaping our own lives and the wider world. So just to tell you a bit about Fawcett's analysis of the government cuts. We believe that the approach that the government is taking to cutting the deficit, that is one that focuses on cutting spending as opposed to, example, through raising taxes, or indeed that focuses on growth. We believe that that strategy of cutting the deficit is leaving women with a triple jeopardy of impacts. We believe that women face disproportionate cuts to their jobs, disproportionate cuts to the services and benefits that they rely on, and also we believe that where services are withdrawn, women are going to be the ones to pick up the tab. So just to talk about each of those in a little more detail, with regards to jobs, the government itself estimates that around 500,000 jobs are going to go in the public sector in the coming years. Now we know that 65% of public sector workers are women, or twice as many women than men work in the public sector. So it stands to reason that a greater percentage of those losing their jobs will be women. However, we're also concerned that women make up an even greater percentage of those low-grade, low-paid, part-time, those backroom admin jobs we keep hearing about that are going to be the first ones to go. And we believe that actually up to 80% of those losing their jobs could be women. So particularly if you look at certain sectors of the public sector, for example, the local government, where around 3/4 of workers are women, the NHS, where around 3/4 of workers are women, again, it stands to reason that we're going to see even higher numbers of women losing their jobs. It's also worth saying that we know that around half of all Black Caribbean women are employed in the public sector. So again, a group that's going to be hit particularly hard. So there's an intersection of race and gender as well as an issue. So we all know it's early days for the impact of the cuts, and actually this Friday marks the start for many public sector workers. But however, evidence is already showing that there's a disproportionate rise in women's unemployment. So for example, the latest figures from February show that in the last year, the number of men claiming job seekers allowance fell by 14%, whereas the number of women claiming job seekers allowance rose by 12%. So we're already seeing that impact. And it's also worth knowing that the number of women aged 25 to 49 on job seekers allowance at the moment is at the highest ever since records began. We're also concerned that obviously the government talks a lot about the private sector coming in and providing jobs, and the budget we saw on Wednesday was very much talking about that. And you know, on the one hand, we're questioning of the strategy they're taking, but on the other, even if the private sector does step in and provide those employment opportunities, we're really concerned that the private sector won't be able to provide adequate opportunities for women. We know that the pay gap overall in the public sector is much lower, so it stands at around 10%, whereas the pay gap in the private sector is 20%. That's because the private sector has adapted, has been much less quick to adapt to the realities of women's lives, where women need good quality, flexible part-time work that recognises the fact they have caring responsibilities. So the public sector's been a lot more progressive in that respect, whereas the private sector's sort of still stuck in the dark ages in many ways. So even if we see this migration of employment, even if that happens, what does that mean for the pay gap for women? What does that mean for women's earnings and women's jobs? So we're worried about that as well. So, as I said, we're also concerned that women face cuts to the services and benefits that they rely on. Women inherently rely more heavily on benefits and services that the state provides than men for a number of reasons. Because women become pregnant, because they live longer and often spend the final years of their lives alone, because they have lower earnings and assets, simply they are poorer, because they have greater caring responsibilities for children, for elderly, for sick and disabled people, because they're far more likely to be lone parents, because they're more likely to be victims of sexual and domestic violence. So those are just some of the reasons why women rely more on the state, use benefits more than men through no fault of their own. So cuts that we're already seeing to services and benefits. For example, we're seeing cuts to children's services, Sure Start centres, whereas the government told us that these centres would be protected. It's already been reported that around 250 centres are going to have to close their doors, and that will affect 60,000 families. And as many of you probably know, those centres have been really crucial in enabling women to balance childcare and work and be able to have an economic independence and be active in the labour market. We're also seeing threats to social care services. So whilst the government has put more money into social care, what it's actually done is removed ring fencing of money at a local council level. So local councils have no imperative to spend money on social care. And we know that where that happens, social care can often be the first thing to suffer. We're seeing services for pregnant women being axed, so antenatal classes are simply being axed. Domestic violence services are also under threat, so Women's Aid did a survey recently and found that around 37% of domestic violence organisations think that they're going to face the threat of closure. We're also seeing services for trafficked women, so some of the most marginalised women being reduced. For example, there's Eve's Housing, which provides residency, provides services for trafficked women, has estimated that the cuts they're receiving amount to a 75% reduction per victim. We're also seeing huge threats to the voluntary sector and the community sector, which, as many of you will recognise, provide vital services and enable women themselves to empower themselves and organise. There's this big society rhetoric on the one hand, but there's a lack of recognition that big society is all fair and well, but you need structures in place, you need people to train and organise, and that does cost money. You have to invest to reap that reward. We're also seeing cuts to legal aid, which we know women rely more heavily on than men. And overall, across the board with services, research that's been done shows that those who will be affected worst are going to be lone parents. So in every instance, it's lone parents who seem to be at the bottom of the pile. So that's services. We're also seeing cuts to benefits, which, again, as I said, women rely more on than men, particularly because they have caring responsibilities and particularly because they're poorer. So in fact, we know that benefits make up twice as much of a woman's income than a man's. So whereas 1/10 of a man's income on average is made up of benefit payments, 1/5 of a woman's income on average is made up of benefit payments. And we're seeing cuts across the board to benefits. For example, we've seen cuts and a freeze to child benefit. And it's worth noting that although some people, some members of the public agree with a freeze on child benefit for higher earners, actually child benefit has raised 2.5 billion, and that compares to 2 billion alone from the bankers' levy. So in that one cut alone, we're seeing more money being taken from children and families than bankers. We've also seen cuts to credits for childcare, again, which is really important in enabling women to combine their caring responsibilities with work. We're seeing huge cuts to housing benefit, where we know that 1 million more women claim housing benefit than men, and again, many of those women will be lone parents facing poverty. Again, cuts to maternity payments, so we've seen the abolition of something called the Health and Pregnancy Grant, which is a one-off sum for women to enable maternal nutrition. We've seen the restriction of the Sure Start maternity grant, which is a grant for low-income women, and that's been restricted to the first child only. So I think, particularly in my mind, it makes very little sense as to why you would give support to a woman's first child but not her subsequent children. We've also seen an increased conditionality on lone parents, so a push to get lone parents back into work. If you're not in work by the time your child reaches 5 years old, you will start to receive sanctions to your benefits. And we don't feel that that's been matched with an equal discussion and exploration of where those jobs are going to come from. Where are we going to find these good quality jobs that enable lone parents to work? So thirdly, as I said earlier, we're also concerned that as services are withdrawn, as support for childcare and elder care and many other forms of care, as those services are withdrawn, we feel that a regressive ideology assumes that women will step in and fill those gaps. So we already know that women do far more unpaid work than men. They do the majority of childcare and elder care. And although I think it's nice to feel that we're gradually moving forward as a society, things are beginning to become more equal with men taking up more responsibility for childcare. Actually, there's still a long way to go, and there's still a lot of assumptions there about whose job it is to do that work. So we're very scared that particular members of the government are quite happy with the direction that's going. And that's also reflected in the welfare reform proposals that are going on at the moment. So you may know that there's a proposal at the moment to roll all benefits into a single payment. And we're concerned that that payment is going to go to a single member of the family. And we're worried that that may actually go to men in more instances than not, and put women's access to independent income under threat. And that's something that the women's movement worked very hard to secure. That's why child benefit goes to women, child tax credits normally goes to women, and that came of a recognition that it's really imperative that women have access to their own independent income. So we're concerned that that is under threat as well. We're also concerned that the universal credit, the ideal model that it seems to be suggesting is a family where you have one breadwinner and one person staying at home, and we're worried that the government has a quite traditional idea about who they think that breadwinner should be and who should be caring for the children. So all in all, we're really concerned, and it's, you know, there's a backdrop to all this. We're not starting from a position of total equality. We already have a persistent pay gap. We already have women more likely to be in poverty, so 64% of low-paid workers are women. 40% of ethnic minority women live in poverty, and women's average income in retirement is only 62% of the average of men's. So that's where we are now. So we're already not in an equal world, and we're concerned that the impact of all these cuts is going to lead to a rollback on women's equality. So rather than that gradual move forward that we kind of have come to expect, actually now we're in a position where we're really concerned that we're going to be rolling back in quite a big way. Just to touch briefly on the budget as well, which just came out last week. I think even though the budget's a bit more vague in terms of its impact on women and men, we were really concerned that the growth strategy, which we've heard a lot about, so this is the big opportunity for the government to start investing in this country, providing jobs for everyone. We're concerned that that presented an opportunity for the government to recognise that there'll be a disproportionate number of women out of work, and talk about how they were going to proactively address that. Unfortunately, we didn't see any of that narrative at all. What we did see, in fact, however, was that small businesses have now been subject to a freeze on new employment practices. So we're concerned that there'll be a two-tier system where women in small businesses don't have the same rights as those in larger businesses. The budget also announced a review of all existing employment law. So all of existing employment law is now up for scrutiny, and obviously that includes many provisions such as flexible working, maternity rights, that the government isn't set to review. And their thinking behind this is that regulation is bad for business, when we actually would disagree heavily. We think that regulation rights for women have increased women's opportunities in the workforce, increased their productivity. So there's this idea that regulation, red tape, is bad for business, and we're concerned that cutting that red tape will be at the expense of women's equality. So that's our analysis, which is developing all the time. But what is Fawcett Society doing to address all of this? Well, we're working on the inside with government to try and change the way they go about drawing up their policies. So the law actually requires that in drawing up their policies, they look at the impact on women and men. And we recently took a legal challenge against the government on the basis of the fact that they hadn't done this for last year's budget. And although we didn't win that case, the High Court judge in that case did in fact recognise that economic policy is subject to equality law. So the government does need to be looking at the impact of its policies on women and men, even at that high level. And you know, for us, that's a huge statement. And we've seen since then, we've seen progress by the government in terms of what they've been publishing alongside their economic policy. And we saw more information published alongside the budget last week than we ever have. But there's still a huge there's still a huge way to go, really, and a lot of that information we think is very, very piecemeal. Sometimes it recognises a problem but does nothing to address it, and that's, you know, obviously we're coming from a perspective where you recognise the problem and then you seek to change it. So we're also working on the outside as well, so with the public and with our partners. So we're working with economists and with other campaign groups to produce data on the impact of the cuts. We're looking to develop an economic analysis that includes women in its narrative. We work a lot with the media and with journalists, so particularly around our judicial review. We secured a lot of media coverage around that, and that's been great for us. That's been a great platform for us to be moving forward with our work. And we're also raising awareness with members of the public, interested groups such as yourself, to enable them to see our analysis. And really, I think the analysis is very, very simple. It's about the fact that women rely more on the state than men through no fault of their own, and therefore cutting the state will hit women hardest. It's a very simple idea, and we need to get it out there, and we need to empower women to be taking that message out and campaigning. So that's what we do. What you can do, well, you can join Fawcett and support our work. You can tell us your personal experiences. So how are the cuts affecting you? It's really vital that we have one-on-one stories, individual narratives to illustrate what we're saying, particularly for the media. You know, we need to put a human face to what we're saying. You can write to your local council about cuts to services. So where you see cuts to childcare services, maybe, or domestic violence services, services that you think are going to hit women harder, you can write to your local council and ask them have they undertaken an assessment of how this will impact on women and men in line with their legal duty. And we're actually going to put some template letters up very shortly on our website. And you can organise locally. We would encourage you. Fawcett's a tiny organisation of only 8 people, so we really hand the baton to you to organise locally. Again, where you see your local services under threat, come together, lobby your local councillor, lobby your local MP. Use the media to facilitate that, and good luck. That's it.
Thank you.